afraid. Okay, that might be a little dramatic. So many times in all of our society, we hear this phrase that we should be afraid. And they won't actually come out and say that, but let's be honest. The news media, everything out there is trying to get us to be afraid. What's in our food? What's not in our food? How our food is prepared? What's going on with our children? What's going on in the Middle East? Everything. Frankly, it gets really old. But that's what we're seeing. We see over and over this idea that we're supposed to be afraid. Now, one of the things that we've done in the church world is we have said that you should not be afraid. And we'll even quote passages that say, like, I have not given you a spirit of fear. And we'll say all of this. But what if I were to tell you that we should be afraid? What if I were to tell you that, in fact, being afraid is one of the foundational pieces you need to have in your life if you want to succeed whatsoever? So we're going to be looking at the book of Proverbs, and we're going to start in Proverbs at the very beginning, and hopefully here over the next several months, we're going to take time and just really dive in and understand what the book of Proverbs is all about. Now, to understand Proverbs, you have to understand who wrote Proverbs. The book of Proverbs was written by King David's son, Solomon. And we see that at the very beginning. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1, it identifies who is giving us these statements. Proverbs 1, verse 1, it says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel." So, as we look at this entire book, we need to understand that it's being written by King Solomon. Solomon was declared to be one of the wisest kings who ever lived. In fact, God came to him and said, ask anything that you want and I'll give it to you. And Solomon said, give me wisdom so that I may lead your people well. Now, that's an incredible thing. And he could have asked for a lot of things. He could have asked for money, power, any sort of things. And instead, he asks for wisdom. And what God tells him is, because you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you all these other things also. And so Solomon became incredibly wealthy, incredibly famous, and incredibly wise. Now, later on in Solomon's life, he gets in trouble and he actually ends up becoming unwise. He gets very dumb. He ends up making all of these alliances through marriage. He ends up married to, a lot of people. And in that, he ends up experimenting with pleasure, and he ends up experimenting with worshiping foreign gods and all of this. And so there's 2 books that Solomon wrote, at least 2. We believe that Song of Solomon was also written by Solomon. But Proverbs and Ecclesiastes are these 2 books, and they come in right after each other. So Proverbs moves right into the book of Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is all about all the things that Solomon tried. So he sits there and he goes on like, I've tried all of these stuff. I have sought out pleasure. I have sought out all of these things, and I found them all to be meaningless. Now, isn't that interesting? Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, decided to do stupid things to see if it would bring satisfaction to his life. And what's interesting about that is we need to understand Solomon so that we can come back and look at the book of Proverbs and we can understand what he's saying. So the very first part of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 1, the first 7 verses, gives us really and truly an overview of the entire book. So it starts off, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. So it identifies Solomon as the author. And then in verse 2, it starts getting into the reason he's writing all of this. He says this, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. So right away, Solomon comes in and he says, look, the entire purpose of the book of Proverbs is for wisdom. The entire reason for the book is so that you can have wisdom. It was written not for Solomon. It was written for you and for me, for the readers of these wise sayings, so that we might have knowledge and understanding and all of that. And what's really incredible is Solomon is putting all of this in so that we can better understand the world around us. We can better understand life. We can better understand all these things. And then he gets into the foundational piece of wisdom right away in verse 7. He says this. He says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." Other translations say, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Now, why fear? Like, really, why fear? Why is fear the cornerstone, if you will, or the foundational piece of wisdom? Why is it that fear is required? Now, I've heard over and over so many times that this really doesn't mean fear. No. It doesn't mean fear. In fact, what it means is healthy respect. It means a healthy respect. You should have a healthy respect for God. That is really the meaning of the word fear. The fear of the Lord. It's not fear. Well, what's funny is when you go in and you actually do a word study on this, and you go all the way back to the original Hebrew and you look at what it means, there's a funny thing about the word fear, the word that is used here. It means to be afraid. Like, it means fear, okay? And not only that, but you see over and over, you see where people come and they say, you know, like they're writing down and they come into contact with God, and what do? They fall on their face before God in fear and trembling. Now, the angel always comes, or God always comes, and he says, do not be afraid. In other words, he's saying, hey, you don't need to be scared. But they always respond in fear. Now, are we to believe that every single person who ever responded that way was wrong? I actually don't think they were wrong. I think they were right. I think that is a healthy view of fear. Now, okay, there are things in life that we're afraid of that we shouldn't be afraid of, okay? There are things, like sometimes we're just paranoid, okay? You know, if you're afraid of leaving your foot hanging over the mattress a little bit because you're afraid that something's going to grab you, that's an unhealthy fear. However, being afraid of sharks, that's a healthy fear because they'll kill you, right? Being afraid of something that's dangerous, that's really good, okay? And so what we need to understand is we need to understand who God is, and if we understand who God is, we will have a healthy fear of him. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by understanding God and having a healthy fear? Jesus put it this way. He said, do not fear those who can only kill the body, but fear the one who can kill the body and send your soul to hell. That's my paraphrase. Now, I always grew up thinking that had to be the devil, right? Like the devil, the one who sent you to hell, all of that. And then as I grew and I began to understand Scripture more, the devil doesn't send you to hell. God is the one who determines who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. Therefore, who's the one that we should fear? The one who has the ability to send your soul to hell. It's the fear of God, and that's coming from Jesus, okay? Here's what we have to understand. When you look at who God is, you begin to understand how great he is, how awesome he is, how powerful he is. You begin to understand his goodness and his mercy and his wrath. You begin to understand his power, his fierce dedication to justice, his holiness, and his despise of evil. And when you begin to understand how powerful he is, that he created everything, from the heavens, the stars, the earth, the rivers, the oceans, all of these things he created just with a spoken word. And then you realize how good he is, how righteous he is, and how holy he is. Suddenly you look and you go, oh wait, I'm none of those things. And we start to understand that we stand in opposition of God. See, the book of Romans tells us really clear that there's no one righteous. Like, nobody's good enough. So, are you on the right side of God or the wrong side of God? Well, apart from Christ, we're all on the wrong side of God. You see, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, and the reason for that is you need to first understand who God is. You need to understand how powerful he is, how mighty he is, how great and how awesome, and all of those things, and simultaneously understand who you are, that you are not perfect. You are not all these things that we should be. I mean, none of us are. And because none of us are, we stand in opposition of God. Now, that's really, really important for us to understand, because when we begin to understand that, we can then turn around and say, I need wisdom, and I need to learn, and I need to grow so that I can become better. Do you see what happens there? See, when you think that you've got it all figured out and you think that you don't need to be worried about anything and all of that, you end up being a fool because you don't fear the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, there's another part to this verse that a lot of times we overlook. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom or knowledge. And then he goes on and he says this. See, throughout the entire book of Proverbs, he draws a contrast between those with wisdom, those with knowledge, and fools. And we need to understand that. So he goes on. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Why is that important? See, a fool is the one who believes that they have it all together. A fool is the one who sits there and says, I don't need God. A fool is the one who over and over and over again trade the righteousness of God and trade the truth for God for everything else. I mean, if you've ever looked at society, looked at the news, looked at any of this, and you thought, why do they even think this? It's because they have traded wisdom for foolishness, because they do not have the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So, what does that mean? It means that you and I need to take a moment and we need to really evaluate who God is. We need to learn who he is while simultaneously understanding who we are. Okay? And that is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge. When you understand who God is and you develop a healthy fear of the Lord, that's when wisdom can come in. And wisdom will change your life if you're willing to do it. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful. We'll see you next time.